Welcome to the Guild Call. I do want to introduce Farzam Afshar is on the line. So Farzam is the person who makes this call possible. So welcome, Farzam. I'm a co-host I'm a co-host along with Hart Logan. I'm kind of the more insurance kind of centered questions, maybe some repairer questions, and Logan is our voice of the consumer. So it's a nice, I think, team from a co-host standpoint. Bill and Kish is our technical person who's online to take care of our technical issues. We've got a great call for you today. We've had a variety of different calls. I've been off the call for a couple scheduling conflicts, so I wasn't on the last two calls, but I'm welcome to be back. This is a technical call about refrigerants. At first blush, you might think that's not very exciting, but I think when you hear what our speaker has to say, I think you'll find it very valuable. We have a variety of questions that we're going to be able to ask you, and issue to your phone. But at the same time, if you have questions about this topic, this is a great time to ask at the end of the presentation, because Tom Hollenstein, who's our guest speaker, does a great job. I need to read the Guild 21 oath because we always start off with that, and then we'll move to the antitrust. So as far as the oath, we are repairers, insurers, vehicle manufacturers, and industry supporters who hereby declare the possibility of aligning our industry to a common vision which puts the customer first. We stand for sweeping innovation. We commit to transparent and focused solutions. We are accountable to invent a radical new future where safety, efficiency, and cost-effective processes are our guiding principles. And I think everybody's heard that a million times before, but as I say on every call where I have a chance to read it, it does remind you of what our focus and our passion is, and I appreciate you attending the call. I'm going to introduce Hart in just a second, but I do need to have Dylan advance the slide because I would like to read our antitrust. It's always important to read the antitrust. Those of you that are out there that are from an insurance side and other disciplines, perhaps not everybody knows that it is necessary to read it out loud, so I'm not wasting your time here. No participant shall be allowed to discuss any subject relating to prices charged, discounts offered of any nature, specific hourly rates, employee benefits, or agreements made with third-party entities. Should any discussion of these items take place, said participant will be asked to refrain immediately, disregarding any pursuant discussion. Should said party deny such a request, this meeting will be immediately disbanded. So you can look to me for monitoring that for you, and I certainly will take action in the unlikely event something were to happen from an antitrust perspective. However, you're always welcome to send a note through the board or interrupt at any time that you think that there's an issue. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Hart, who's going to introduce our speaker today. Hart?
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. And from the consumer perspective, it is always a total honor and privilege for me to be on this call, knowing that this call exists, knowing that these sort of three aspects of the industry are coming together for any topic, right? To learn something new and how to more effectively repair cars, to learn about how to better fulfill claims, to see things from the OEM, the manufacturer perspective, really helps me have some reassurance, which is interesting because I've learned so much on these calls that sometimes it could go the other way. But knowing that you're here listening, that you're making a difference, I believe really makes the roads a safer place. So I want to thank you for being here. And while you're here, we want to make sure that it's not just listening, but also interactive. So before I introduce the speaker, I just want to remind you on how to communicate throughout the call. So there will be times during the call when we'll take some polls, and I'll direct you in that moment. But when we're not doing polls, if you have a question during the presentation or really any time, press 1 on your phone. If you have a burning question that has to be answered right now, please interrupt the speaker. This has to be dealt with immediately. Press 2 on your phone. And if you like what you hear, press 5 on your phone. 5 is the equivalent of applause. We are sharing the slideshow on the screen. So if you go back to your original email by Farzam, I think there was one sent out early this morning, it will have a link to screen share, which makes it really easy to follow along as we go. I believe there's also a PDF you could download should you choose to. And I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today, Tom Hollensten, who's going to talk about how to deal with the changes of AC and refrigerants. So Tom's a senior level technology researcher with over 20 years of experience with State Farm Insurance, designing and conducting studies that keep employees appraised of cutting-edge advances in automotive technology, research and development, and their impact on the insurance industry. He has many technical certifications, including ASE Certified Master Auto Technician, ASE Certified Collision Damage Estimator, and Certified Bosch CDR Data Analyst, to name a few. There's also a patent granted to Tom for creating a device for automatic crash notification, which is pretty cool. Interesting fact, well, a couple interesting facts actually. Turns out that Tom and George have known each other for over 20 years. But even before that happened, about 29 years ago, Tom had a very big surprise when his wife had triplets. That's right, 3 boys. He got really good at changing diapers. And at the peak, he worked out that that there were over 900 diapers a month, or 1 every 30 minutes for 24 hours a day. Can you imagine? So that I think you deserve an award just for that alone, Tom. But that said, let's hear what you have to say about AC refrigerants. Welcome, Tom.
Tom, before you get, hey Tom, welcome. Before you get started, I'd like to introduce, and Dylan, if you could advance the slide a couple here, I'd like to introduce someone real quick. And I kind of got out of sync there, Hart, so thanks. Sorry about that. Real quick, before we get started, I just wanted to let you know, and I'd like to introduce Mike Casada. AMI has approached us with the possibility of getting credit for attending this podcast. So, Mike, I'd like to introduce Mike Casada. And Mike, if you could just give us a brief explanation of the process and what's being offered.
Sure. Thanks, George. Much appreciated. My name is Mike Casada. I'm the Industry Outreach Director for the Collision segment of AMI. We're very happy to provide credit, AMI elective credit, for many methods of alternative learning. And alternative learning, in most cases, includes articles you may have read, podcasts you've listened to, videos you may have watched, and things like the Guild 21 teleconference. These are great tools to keep up with the industry, and we feel if you take the time to do this, you should be given credit for it. So if you see the slide that's up there, that's the landing page for AMI. And if we can advance that one more slide, hopefully you'll see the link that is on the bottom of the page on your email that you received. So after this teleconference is over, if you click on that link and just fill out a very brief profile, you can advance right to the quiz. It's 5 or 6 questions of what you've learned today. Fill that out and take the quiz, and then you qualify for AMI credit. It's that simple. We really appreciate Guild 21 for allowing us to participate. Much appreciated, and we really hope you take advantage of this. And that's it. Please enjoy the presentation.
All right, thank you, Mike. Tom, we'll turn it over to you if we have Dylan advance the slide for you and let you get started.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be a presenter today. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about refrigerants and primarily the conversion over to R1234YF refrigerant. Many of us that have been in and around the industry for a number of years may remember back in the early 90s when R12 was or what's properly referred to as Freon, was being phased out of production for new vehicles and eventually banned outright for use in cars unless you had an AC license. This is a very similar time. We've got R134A is being sunsetted for use in new vehicle production starting with the 2021 model year. So vehicles produced after August of 2020 for U.S. market will have to be using R1234YF, no more R134A. Although R134A, unlike R12, will be available to continue to service the existing vehicle fleet. As many of you may remember, going back to the R12 situation when we were converting to 134A, R12 was sunsetted, and retrofits had to be developed where you were actually going in, changing some components on the vehicle, putting barrier hoses on older cars, and doing a retrofit from R12 to R134A. We won't have to deal with that going forward because they are going to go ahead and service R134A for the existing vehicle fleet. So the good news is we're not going to have to be doing conversions. So at least that's one thing off our plate. And in fact, the conversion to HFO 1234YF, or more commonly referred to as R1234YF, may in fact be somewhat simpler than what we dealt with nearly 30 years ago. Let's go ahead and advance one slide, please. The refrigerant itself was developed in cooperation with DuPont and Honeywell, and it goes by the trade names of Opteon, which is the correct trade name for the DuPont version, or Solstice for the Honeywell version. What we see many times out there in the industry is people tend to get comfortable with certain trade names. Freon, for example. R134A was never Freon. Technically, its correct trade name is SUVA, S-U-V-A. But we got into, Kleenex is every facial tissue and Xerox is every photocopy. We got into the habit of using Freon as a catch-all to describe refrigerants, when that is not the correct name, and in fact confuses the consumer because they think Freon is Freon. But you have these different refrigerants that have different trade names and obviously different price points, which we can't refer to. But it does pose challenges for the repair industry. Let's go ahead and jump forward another slide. R1234YF is fairly easy to identify. The container will always be white. The lettering on the container will always be red. Where in the past when we were dealing with 134A, it was always kind of that pale bluish color, robin's egg blue color with the color of the larger 30-pound containers. And then, of course, some of the smaller cans could be in multi-colors. But those are mainly aimed at consumer repair rather than repair at a facility. So if you're looking at a air conditioning machine at a facility, it has containers that are white with red lettering on it, more than likely you're going to be dealing with R1234YF. Okay, let's jump forward another slide. Getting into this again, we should use the correct nomenclature. We should use the correct terminology. Freon is R12 and may apply to certain home refrigerants, but in the automotive world, that's R12. R134A is SUVA, that's the correct name. We covered that earlier, and it is being phased out for the 2021 model year for new vehicle production for the North American market, but it is not being phased out for servicing the existing fleet. The Europeans actually had an accelerated retirement of 134A, and it is pretty much phased out of the European production market completely. An interesting note on that, there were several refrigerants being considered as a replacement for 134A. R744 CO2 was one of them. R152A was another. They all had challenges. The reason that R134A really won out, or R1234YF really won out, was it had very, very similar operating characteristics to 134A. Operated at very similar pressures on the high side, had a compatibility in many respects with 134A, had very similar cooling efficiency and required very, very minimal changes to existing air conditioning system design to accommodate it being used in a vehicle. Although it can't be considered a direct drop-in, because it does have mild flammability and there had to be some system design changes to accommodate that, it was the most cost-effective way to achieve the global warming numbers and ozone depletion numbers that were required under the new legislation. Let's move to the next slide, please. This is a good question, and we've kind of covered it in depth, but will our 1234YF replace 134A as a retrofit refrigerant in existing vehicles? True or false?
Yeah. So if you believe that R1234YF will replace R134A as a retrofit, press 1 on your phone. If you think it will not replace R134A as a retrofit, press 2 on your phone. So 1 for true, 2 for false. The answers are coming in. Keep them coming. I want to make sure that everybody participates. So 1 for yes, 2 for no, or 1 for true, 2 for false. And the answers are still coming in. Oh, got another one coming in. All right, last chance. 1 for true on your phone, 2 for false on your phone. And it's interesting, about a third, about 33% say that it is true, and about 67% say it's false.
Some interesting numbers based on our conversation.
Mm-hmm. They are interesting.
Why don't you reiterate what the correct answer is, Tom?
Okay. If the voting's closed, our 1234YF will not be used to retrofit systems that currently use R134A. R134A will continue to be manufactured and available to service the existing systems, and we will not have a retrofit program similar to what we saw when R12 was retired.
And Tom, that means 2 different machines for recovery?
Yes, sir. Yeah, you're going to have to maintain your existing your existing 134A machine for evacuating a system if it hasn't been breached, and recovering that refrigerant and servicing that system, and then also a new machine. The primary providers of those machines, there's a European company, MAHL builds machines for the European market, had some impact in the U.S. market. Probably the largest manufacturer of 1234YF machines in the U.S. market is Robinair. There are a few others entering the market, but you will have to purchase new equipment to service the 1234YF system. And now we'll talk a little bit about why the change. We all thought that when we changed from R12 to 134A, our global warming problems were over. We had addressed the issues with refrigerants. Unfortunately, it was found that when R134A got into the upper atmosphere, it broke down into some of its component parts. And it still did have a significantly higher global warming potential than we had hoped. Still about a global warming potential of about 1,300, which is very high. The mandate is to have a global warming potential of 4 or less, so significantly lower. Of course, R12 was much higher than that. So that's one of the reasons. R12 obviously had gotten very expensive when production stopped and it was limited.
Oh dear. I think we might have lost you for a minute, Tom. Are you still there?
Yeah, it just dropped out for a second.
You're back.
We lost signal. Yeah, I was talking, and then I heard you come on.
Well, we found you.
One wonderful cellular technology.
Do you want to issue this question number 2, Tom? Do you ask them why the change? I know you went through it. I don't know if you want to issue the question or just tell them what the answer is.
Yeah, I think you back again?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It just seemed to drop out again. Why the change to R134A? And is it too expensive? It's more efficient for cooling? Does it have a lower global warming potential? Is it easier to install? I got a little out of sequence here and pretty much gave you the answer. My apologies. A little rusty on doing these things. But definitely has a lower global warming potential, and that was the reason for it.
So, Tom, obviously it was an expense issue. You already said that they had very similar cooling, and I guess the install and service is all pretty much the same, right? It's just two different components, different material.
It is very similar, and in fact, the newer machines are highly automated. They did come in at a significantly higher cost, but the level of automation in the machines make the servicing procedure as easy or easier than we had with R134A.
So one thing, Tom, when you had a 134A machine, there was always the risk of contaminating what you had by pulling in something wrong, and there was ways to detect that, and I assume that's still in play. Do these machines have any benefits as it relates to that?
Actually, there are greater safeguards than we previously had. Before, we had a separate refrigerant identifier where you had to go through an additional step where you hooked up your refrigerant identifier. Essentially, it sniffed the system and would detect if it was pure 134A, if it had hydrocarbons in it, because sometimes they use other refrigerants that have hydrocarbons in them, if it was pure air or if it had R12, and it would register and tell you. If it was 98% or pure, you could recover it through your recovery machine without causing a problem. But it was an extra separate step, and sometimes you'd be in a hurry, you would bypass that step, just hook up your machine and extract the refrigerant. If you hadn't verified it was pure, you could contaminate your equipment and the vessel that you're recovering it into. And then you have to deal with safety clean, and it becomes a hazardous waste, and you can't use it, you can't recycle it, can't clean it. It really becomes a problem. The new equipment, the identifier is integrated into the machine. When you hook up the machine, before it begins the extraction procedure, it will identify the refrigerant, and if it is not pure enough, 1234YF, it will stop you and it will not allow you to extract it, thus preventing contamination of your equipment and the vessel you're recovering it to.
Thanks. So let's advance the slide because I'd like you to explain what you were talking about with the global warming deal.
And this gets to the crux of why the change. R12 Freon had a global warming potential of 1, or ozone depletion potential of 1, which you don't think is bad, but 1 was the benchmark that they considered 1 horrible. So anything less than 1 is better. It had a global warming potential of 2,400. And at the time that they mandated the phase out of R12, we weren't even talking about global warming potential. That wasn't even really on the horizon. Once we got R134A out there and they figured out that it was breaking down in the upper atmosphere and it was causing issues, even though it had an ozone depletion number of 0, it still had a global warming potential of 1,300, which was not good. So they started looking for an alternative refrigerant that, number one, would provide the performance necessary and durability. Number two, would have a very low or non-existent ozone depletion potential, and would also lower the global warming potential to less than 4. And there were a number of refrigerants they were looking at. I had mentioned 152A and 744. Both had technical challenges. 152A has a greater flammability than 1234YF, which made it less desirable. And R744, or compressed CO2, had an operating pressure on the high side of about 1,880 psi. So a much greater operating pressure than we saw with R134A or R12 previous to that. And R1234YF operates in that same range, right in the 300 psi, 320 range on the high side. So it was nothing we weren't used to. It wouldn't require tremendous reengineering of the system. It did have a mild flammability, not much greater than we saw with R134A when it had refrigerant oil in it. It will ignite at temperatures above 900 Fahrenheit, but that's not all that much different than we saw with 134A. There was a pushback from a few of the German manufacturers. They were really holding out for R744, but the technical challenges and costs became so prohibitive that they eventually yielded and went with 1234YF as well. But it did slow the adoption somewhat.
Okay, so this George, so the rumor about it being flammable, because as I know, the more I know about cars, the more I realize in the movies that when the car goes off the cliff, there's probably not a good chance it's going to blow into flames like you see. And
right.
So I remember a lot of discussion. So when you say 900 degrees, say again where that is on the food chain of how flammable that is.
Well, to give you an example of other fluids and things in the engine compartment, automatic transmission fluid. Obviously, it runs through an intercooler on the radiator. Our radiators get punched all the time in a front-end collision. If the car is running, automatic transmission fluid can be sprayed out onto a hot exhaust manifold. It will ignite at temperatures far below 900 degrees. So if you crash your car into something and you break the transmission intercooler and the engine's still running, you have pressurized fluid coming out of either the power steering pump, a power steering line, or an automatic transmission line, and it's spraying onto hot engine components. 400 to 500 degrees, it will ignite. It takes nearly double that temperature to ignite the 1234YF. So it was really almost ludicrous that they were so concerned about the flammability, especially in the engine compartment. They were a bit concerned because it does pass the bulkhead into the passenger compartment. But there are many things inside a vehicle that will ignite temperatures far below 900 degrees. So it really, was it a concern? Yes. Did SAE look at it in depth? Yes. Was there exhaustive testing on the flammability of it? Yes. Other than the pushback from some of the European manufacturers on it, which eventually waned, that was really the only hiccup in its adoption.
I don't know if I feel better or worse now. So, all right, so let's move on. I think you have a question for the group.
Yeah, so it looks like the question is, R1234YF operates at blank pressure on the high side than R134A. So does it operate at a higher pressure? Press 1 if it operates at a lower pressure. Press 2 on your phone if it operates about the same, and press 3 if R1234YF operates at a higher pressure than R134A. Did I get that right, Tom?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so again, press 1 if you think it's going to be at a lower pressure. Press 2 if you think it's going to be about the same. And press 3 on your phone if you think it's going to be higher. So the answers are coming in. Keep them coming. Again, press 1 on your phone if you think it's going to operate at a lower pressure. Press 2 if you think it's going to operate about the same. And press 3 if you think it's going to operate higher. And I'm glad I did that little song and dance because it changed. All right, so here's what we have. Looks like only 5%, only about a little less than 10% think it's going to operate at a lower pressure. More than half, about 55%, believe that it's going to operate at a higher pressure. And about 36% believe it's going to operate higher. So it looks like the big winner is about the same with higher as second place.
And that would be correct. The pressure on the high side is approximately the same as you saw with 134A. And that was one of the real big concerns in engineering is they were trying to make it as cost effective as possible. And the properties of 1234YF are very, very close to 134A. So it didn't require tremendous resizing of the condenser and changes in the compressor, the lines. Really did make it one of the most cost-effective choices in changing refrigerant.
Hey, Tom, this is George. We're doing good on time, so I'm going to ask this question.
Sure.
And I didn't ask you this before, but I remember it, or parts of it. So when they were coming up with some new solutions, they did find, was it CO2 that they found was the absolute best, but the pressure issue was what chased that away?
Yeah.
Is there any more activity with that solution?
There are a couple of companies still working on development. The biggest problem that you ran into, and any of us that have worked in the repair industry, you know the big gas cylinders that had your argon or Trimix for your welders, they were pressurized to in excess of 2,000 psi, 2,000 to 2,500 psi. Very high pressure. And if you've ever been around one of those that have fallen over or the valve's gotten busted off, the thing becomes a giant missile. It shoots across the shop and tumbles around out in the field. Operating at temperatures of 2,000 psi, should that system be breached, you're going to have a pretty violent event. And that was one of the concerns. They were going to have to do something to keep that pressure on the bulkhead side. So they were actually going to have to develop a system that had a lower pressure component inside the car. So it was a much more complicated system, much more costly. There were tons of development challenges, and it really was going to escalate the cost of the systems. So once they became comfortable with the flammability level, it really slowed or diminished the interest in the CO2 system.
All right, thanks. I didn't mean to derail you, but because now that
not
means
at all.
Is flammable blow up, or if they did that, it would blow up under pressure. But I remember you telling me a long time ago that they were working on it, so I just asked. Okay, go ahead and move forward.
I'd rather manage the flammability side than have to manage the high pressure side. It did require, when we did shift to 1234YF, they did revise the EPA 609 training and other training that's available through both SAE and MAX in how to deal with refrigerants. And if you don't currently have the current 609 certification, you probably are going to have challenges purchasing the material. So I would strongly recommend that if you haven't availed yourself of those opportunities, that you do, and become current on the 609 training, because it is going to help you in your daily repairs. One of the things the industry has been able to avoid to this point is this has been phased in since 2012. GM was an early adopter, although limited on some Cadillac models as early as 2012, but they really didn't go wide into their vehicle production until much later. In fact, FCA, or Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, passed them up in about 2014 when they started putting it in the 300, the Charger, many of the Ram 1500 pickups, the Chrysler 200. So they really, as far as a large-scale manufacturer, they really adopted it faster than most. And obviously, when a car is under warranty, unless it's in a collision, there's not a lot of demand in the secondary repair market to charge these systems. But in the collision world, there is. When you saw the vehicles infrequently enough where it wasn't cost effective for you to have the equipment on hand, subletting it out to a dealership that had the equipment might have been an option. But we've reached that critical tipping point where there are enough vehicles out there with these systems on there, and with all new vehicle production starting September 2020 for the 2021 year model, they'll all have this refrigerant. If you haven't invested in the training and equipment, it's definitely time to start looking at that. Because it's going to be a problem with cycle time, and you're going to be seeing enough of these vehicles coming in your door where you're probably going to want to consider having that capability in your arsenal. All right. Let's see if we can advance another slide. The equipment and training is available. Initially, it was quite expensive. I know when we purchased our equipment, it was about 3 to 4 times the cost of R134A equipment. So it definitely was, for early adopters, it was a fairly big expense. It is getting better. It's down to probably about twice the cost of a comparable 134A machine. And the refrigerant oil is somewhat specialized. It is still a PAG type oil, fully synthetic, and you just want to make sure you're using the correct viscosity and make sure that it is compatible with 1234YF. Okay, and we'll jump to the next screen. That there is a list out there of vehicles that are currently using it. This is a link to that list. It was published recently on LinkedIn. I did go back and take a look at it. It is pretty darn accurate, and it does cover the majority of the models that do have that refrigerant. It might be good for you to refer to it just to see, look at the business you have coming in your door and to see if it involves a significant number of those vehicles. It might help you make the decision if that's a cost-effective thing to do to procure that equipment and training. Yeah, I think that might be our last question, or last slide. Now, questions, I'd be open to answering any questions you may have on that. And I do have a good amount of technical information that I can provide. Just didn't want to get too far into the weeds just on the PowerPoint.
Thank you, Tom. So if you have a question, please press 1 on your phone, and I'll call on you and unmute you. Again, if you have a question, please press 1 on your phone. Tom, I did have a question about some of this, which is I feel like I can see these refrigerants sometimes in the automotive aisle in like Walmart, and it feels like almost I as a consumer could add a coolant into my car. How realistic or crazy is that?
With existing systems with 134A, there are a number of options available, and for the consumer to do that, usually in these small 12-ounce cans, they have now restricted the consumer from buying large 30-pound canisters without certification. But you can still buy the small ones that you, like you said, you do see in Walmart or independent parts stores. So the consumer can do some service work on R134A systems. Currently, there really isn't 1234YF available to the general consumer. My wife works in the parts business, and I try to get to see if she can even procure it. The company she works for doesn't even sell it commercially currently, even in the larger containers. They certainly don't have the smaller containers, and they do require the person show their 609 certification, AC license, so to speak, to purchase the material. So servicing the 1234YF systems is pretty much not going to be a DIY, do-it-yourselfer situation. I think that's pretty much going to sunset with the 134A systems.
Well, that's good to know. I probably would not attempt it, but I know a few people that might have. So it looks like we have a question from Chris. I don't have your last name on here. So Chris, you can raise your hand. You are on the line.
Oh, hey, thank you, Art. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sounds great.
Excellent. Hey, Tom, my last name's McDonald. Tom, I have a question for you. I've noticed on vehicles when in the same model year you could potentially get 134 or 1234. The vehicles with 1234, I noticed the load is smaller, or the where they might be whatever, just as 2 pounds of 134, and in a 1234, that same vehicle might carry 1.8. Do you know if if the internal components are smaller on these when they do that, or do they just use less amount per volume?
Typically, we have seen the systems are 25 to 30% smaller in refrigerant capacity, where a typical system used to be 1.2 to 1.4 pounds. Many times we're seeing them around 0.8 pounds, 0.9. Physically, there is less space in the system. The efficiency of the refrigerant is slightly better, and the efficiency of the systems are slightly better. But you are correct. They generally use a little bit less refrigerant volume than a typical 134A system uses.
Great.
That was a good question.
You. That was a good question. We actually have another question. We have a question from Joel Feldman. Joel, you are on the line.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for all the great info as usual. But I read somewhere in one of the trade magazines that not all the car manufacturers like this stuff, and a few of them are not going to change to it. Is that still true?
And that goes back primarily to the European market. There was a pushback by several of them, and they did stick their pick in the ground at one point. So much so that one of the German manufacturers was prohibited, or was threatened to be prohibited to sell cars in France because they weren't making the global warming and ozone depletion potential numbers. They eventually yielded to that and did use 1234YF, but you are correct. There was a fairly significant pushback a few years back. But going forward, at least for the North American market, they're not going to be exempt from doing this or something else. But currently, there aren't any other viable systems out there with R744 or 152 in production. And I haven't heard of anybody going to that. But you can't rule it out because both could potentially meet the ozone depletion and global warming numbers.
Super. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Interesting. Thank you. We have another question from Gene Lopez. Gene, you are on the line and live.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I saw that list or a link to a list of vehicles that are now using the 1234. Will you be able to share it? You said it was on link, but that's important to me, and I'm sure some of the other callers would like to see that list. So where else can we find that?
A good question, Gene. So what we'll do is, as we do with all guild calls, we will make the PowerPoint available along with a recording of the call. So that is available in the future. Now, it takes a few days to get that processed and uploaded, and that would come, I believe, from Linda at Verifax, I believe. But regardless, we will make sure that that is pushed out and is available. Now, my confidence level dipped just slightly there as I said that. I know it's accurate. I just don't know the timing. Dylan or
yeah, it usually comes out a few days. Maybe not. Yeah.
Sometimes we have to do we have to do a little bit of a technical work to get that out. However, it's in this case, Tom is willing to share that, and we'll be more than happy to do that as well. But this is sometimes, depending on a speaker, we don't have a permission to share their information. But in this case, given George is saying it's okay with Tom, so we're definitely moving forward on that. So give us some time to put that up for you and share that with the people participating on this call.
And we can find these links, and we can find the presentation at Verifax, or
I believe it's sent out as an email.
Yes, it'll be sent email. Okay, great, that's good. All right, I appreciate your help.
Mm-hmm.
No, good question,
James.
The other interesting thing for those of you that are interested in participating with AMI, that's the same place I believe you'll go to get the link to get to AMI. So if you didn't catch that link during the presentation, that will be available on the presentation, so you'll have that along with the link, I believe, is on the invitation. So there's really a couple things you'd go after the call's over, and as far as I said, it kind of depends on the timing, but it should only take a few days.
I'd like to interject just for 1 second. In regard to the list, there were a number of vehicles that were in transition and were maybe manufactured at multiple locations. So even though it may be on the list as a vehicle that can have R1234YF, check the sticker under the hood because, for an example, the Ram pickups during model year 13 and 14, it depending on the assembly plant, it could either be R134A or 1234YF. So even though technically it could be available, it could go either way. So always refer to the sticker on the vehicle to be absolutely sure. The fittings are similar sized. They're not exact. You can force a 1234YF fitting onto an R134A system, and I'm not pleased that they use the same style of connectors, just change the size by just a tiny little bit. But just make sure to try to check that sticker. I know many times it's on the underside of the hood or the core support, which may be destroyed. You may actually have to use the VIN and contact the dealer if that information has been destroyed.
Okay, thank you. We do have a couple more questions. So I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but Gerardo Carrillo, you are live.
Hey, my question is, I'm one of the technical consultants for Gerber Collision. My question is the components to compressors and everything else, does that change to use this system, or it all basically stays the same O-rings and Schrader valves and that kind of?
The majority of the systems stay the same. O-rings, the hoses were already barrier hoses. Primarily, the changes in the system was to accommodate the flammability. They just wanted to make sure they weren't creating unnecessary heat and sparks. So that was the big change. It wasn't so much the hoses and O-rings and things that changed. The compressor design is not all that much different. They're all still almost all a scroll type compressor. So and we've had them apart, looked at them. They haven't changed significantly. So it was mainly to accommodate the increased chance of flammability.
And the running a vacuum runs the same way too, oil.
Yep. Pulling a vacuum on the system, waiting so many minutes, making sure you don't have a leak. All of those types of things are very similar. But the new machines are highly automated. Once you hook the machine up and start it, essentially it goes through all of the steps that you would normally do manually. It pulls the vacuum, it waits so long, it'll let you know if it passed the vacuum test before you can begin a charge cycle. So all of that is really highly automated in the new equipment.
Very neat. Thank you for the right answers. Thanks for the info.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. It looks like we have one more question from Sean Schotter. Again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing names. Sean, you are live.
Hello, thanks for having me. So I have a two-part question. Will we need a separate machine for hybrids? And second part is, the gentleman that asked the second question, I heard something about other manufacturers maybe using other refrigerants. So are car manufacturers all going to use the 1, 2, 3, 4, or are they going to use, and I'm going to need more equipment?
Currently, there's nobody that's going into production that is using anything in current production vehicles other than 134A or 1234YF. I know of nobody who has plans currently to bring another refrigerant into the market for passenger cars and light trucks. So I would say you're pretty safe about having to buy additional equipment. And excuse me, what was the first part of your question? It just
hybrids. Will I need a separate machine for hybrids like I currently do?
The machine, the refrigerant's going to be the same. You shouldn't need anything different for a hybrid vehicle. The machine from Robinair for 1234YF would work on a hybrid as well as a pure EV. If it's a pure EV that's using 1234YF, it'll work on that as well. So you shouldn't need a separate machine for hybrids or pure electrics like a Tesla or something like that.
Okay, yeah, that was my question. So I appreciate the answer. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and your knowledge on this topic, Tom, is obviously incredibly vast and greatly appreciated. It's really wonderful to have all your insights here. So that said, we have just a little more time left. I'm wondering if there are any other questions, any more questions, press 1 on your phone. And I wondered, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Farzam. I just want to also add Verifax is working on a matrix, and we'll be working with some experts, and Tom being included, putting together a matrix of vehicles to be using different refrigerant. So be looking out for that as well. Just FYI for the listeners here.
Perfect.
That would be really nice to have a one-stop shop for that, knowing which refrigerant and which viscosity of PAG oil is required and what the typical charges were for amounts were for refrigerant in the vehicle. So that might be a really helpful item.
Hey, Tom, this is George. You're going after that list through LinkedIn, and I just can't help but think that there's got to be a resource from the OE. So are we just assuming that when you get on One Stop or you go wherever you go to get your OE repair information, is it out there, or are we pretty much relying on somebody creating a list? And, of course, that even makes Farzam's comment about Verifax creating a metrics even more valuable. So I was just curious about the OE.
The OE information is out there, but you have to go to each individual manufacturer. To the best of my knowledge, I haven't seen any other list as complete as that one, bringing multiple manufacturers together. And I think that's where Farzam had mentioned doing a matrix would be a great thing, because we can go to each of the individual manufacturers, get the information, but if we can put that all together on 1 or 2 pages or on one site, it would be much quicker to reference than having to go into each individual manufacturer.
Good,
right, and looks like actually we have one last, I think we have time for one last question. So this is, let me unmute you, R. Lang. R, I'm sure it's not your actual first name, but please take it away. You are live.
Yes, this is Bob. We've had some difficulty locating a vendor to acquire 1234YF hybrid oil. Are you aware of anybody that's selling that at this point?
And that becomes it's not just on the hybrids, it's on any of the vehicles that use an electrically driven compressor, because the refrigerant oil has to be non-conductive if you're using an electric drive compressor, primarily hybrids, but there are some EVs and things that do that. As far as having a resource for that, through the OE you can get it. I don't have a particular vendor for it currently, but if I do come up with one, I will go ahead and share that information.
Yeah, if you'd like to, the caller, Robert, Bob, I forgot. I'm sorry. If I don't mind you communicating with Verifax or myself at george@averyknows.com, and I can have Tom kind of get that information to him so he can go about his life without getting hundreds of emails or a number of emails. So I'll throw that out, that you can certainly, if you want to send your contact information to me, I can get you hooked up if Tom does some additional resource so you can find out, because that's got to be frustrating. If you can't, you know what to do, you've got the tools to do it, and you can't find the material, that's got to be pretty frustrating.
And going forward, that's going to be more of a concern in that we're having more and more vehicles where the AC compressor is being driven electrically like it is on a hybrid or a pure electric vehicle, and not being driven by a belt off of the crankshaft. And any of those vehicles need to be treated the same. They need to have that non-conductive refrigerant oil, or potentially you could develop some significant issues.
The cars do blow up. No, I'm just kidding. All right, hey, Tom, thank you. Hart, I just wanted to say that just for future, the rest of the year, we're going to focus on having OEMs on the Guild 21 call. So if you're interested in that, you're more than welcome to attend the calls and anticipate having some OEMs on there. So I just wanted to throw that out. So with that, Hart, that's all I had. If you're ready to conclude the call.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to thank Tom. You were so informative and knowledgeable. It was really wonderful to hear all your insights. And there was actually a couple more questions left, and you have a lot of hands clapping. So your knowledge was greatly appreciated. I also want to thank Sparsum for joining us, and of course, welcome back, George. Our next call is going to be Thursday, September 13th at 11 a.m. Pacific. We will be sending the details out about the speaker as we get closer to the date, and we look forward to hearing you there. Have a wonderful end of summer. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, we're back in the green room.
All right, thanks, John. Good job, Tom. Are you still on?
Yes, sir.
So, good job. I know it's problematic when you can't advance your own slides. We do have that capability. It's just a few extra steps. So, thanks for dealing with advance. I know that's not in all the years you've been in front of groups. That's something you don't normally have to do every day. So I want to thank you very much. As far as throwing my email out there, Tom, if that's okay with you, I was going to have this, anything that comes my way, if you wouldn't mind, it's your convenience. If you do find any information on the compressor oil for the electrically driven pumps, if you want to get that to me, I can certainly manage
I sure will.
From having to deal with it. I had a couple other recommendations for the group. Mark, is there anything that you want to add?
Was anyone on the dashboard today, or was it just me?
I was also on the dashboard.
Oh, you were?
I was not.
I think it would just, I think George is I know you're kind of not great self-interest, but it's when possible it would help us to have you on the dashboard as well. Just so we can
have to give up the PowerPoint then? Well, the way I understood
He was the one who's advancing it.
Well, no, Dylan was, but I didn't know that I could do both. I thought that I either had the screen, that was my understanding, is I couldn't do both. So that's something that I'm hoping to fix.
Yeah, I have them both open. I just have two windows, where one window is the Maestro, and then I open the PowerPoint in another slide.
All right, I gotta get shored up on that, and that'll bring me to. So I if you were chatting with me, I apologize because I'm sitting here staring at the screen. Having said that, I think that I need to create a phone slide. You know how you go through and say, "Hey, if you want
that'd be great."
We have something like that somebody's created. I can't be the first guy that's wanted that. So before I create it, I wanted to see if Maestro happened to have a screen.
No, we've developed that ourselves.
All right. So my to-do item is I'll be Dylan, if it's okay with you, if you know what the cadence is, I'll just kind of go back and forth with you and create a slide that we'll use in the future. So when Art says, "Hey, let me tell you how to use the deal," press, it's all up there on the screen.
Right.
I thought I would create that. The other thing I'd like to do, I think, is we always talked about it, but we just never could get it done, primarily because we were pretty last minute all the time in the past. But now that we're getting ahead of the game, where we had Tom in the can, almost 30 days before this call, and then we got the PowerPoint to you a week early. I think it was at the last minute, and so because of that, I'd like to schedule a rehearsal. So my question is, if I can get the speaker and myself available, Dylan, are you available to participate in about a 30-minute little rehearsal thing, so we can get that speaker clicking along? Because Tom,
great idea.
Tom is just phenomenal, and I've seen him talk for, like I said, over 20 years. It would have been helpful, I think, to have one. We would have clicked along just a little more efficiently. We did fine, but I think in the future we'll have a variance in types of presenters. So it sounds like you're available for rehearsal, so I'll start coordinating those. Good for that. That's all I had. Thanks, Tom. Love talking to you. I love hearing you talk, man. You got good stuff. You got a lot in your brain, buddy.
Just between my, I ended up moving to a different area because the phone kept cutting out, so that was the problem. It's nice to get back to doing this again. Get a little rusty doing it for a while.
I'd like to have you back because there's 4 or 5 other topics that of the many that you have that I think will fit in. I think we're going to focus on OEMs along the way as we get to the year, but I'd certainly like to check out their availability and donating your time to the Field 21 calls. I think you can see by at least the sense I got from the call, is pretty valuable technical information that's timely. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Alrighty.
Yeah. Thank you on my behalf as well. Thank you so much for everyone, and Tom, great job. George, thank you for getting it all up and presentable, and Hart, as always, it's great to hear your beautiful voice, and it was very warm, and I thought this would be a pretty boring subject, to tell you the truth, but as unbelievable the number of questions came through, it was very, very great to see the interest and the need out there in the market. So thank you all for making it work. And also, is Mike Casada on the call still? Nope. That was a great idea to get Mike on the thing, George, to get people credit by being on the call. That's it for me. And Dylan, thanks very much for having you on board as well. Back to you, Hart.
Well.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great having you there, Dylan. Great job.
All right.
Well, thanks.
Well, have a
everybody.
great day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.